many believers, negativity can become their own worst enemy. It can become the very thing that keeps an individual from being able to experience living a spiritually thriving life. It can be the very thing that keeps an individual from accomplishing God's purpose for them in this life. Negativity. Research and statistics will tell us this: the average human being has over 60,000 thoughts per day. And over 77% of those thoughts for the average person are negative. My first thought upon hearing the alarm clock is, no, I didn't sleep well at all last night. Already negative thought. And then that thought can turn into, wow, today is just going to be a dreadful day. I know what's facing me today, and it's not a day that I'm looking forward to. Negative thought. And that can be after then you get out of bed and you go downstairs and you go and you take a shower, and after you take a shower, you're like, man, that shower has already exhausted me. I'm telling you, I've done so much right now. It's just another negative thought that turns into running just a little bit late to work or to an appointment. And then those negative thoughts of, I know today is going to be one of those days where I get stuck behind that individual who wants to take a 25-mile-per-hour joyride on a Monday morning. I know that's what's going to happen. Or I just know that traffic light up there, it's going to turn. The moment I get close to it, it's going to get yellow. It's going to put me in one of those crisis moments of, do I accelerate or do I begin to brake? Negative thought. Those negative thoughts can continue on as you start thinking about, well, I've got this appointment later on in the week, or I've got this doctor's appointment, or I got this checkup, or I've got this person who's been wanting to get together with me, and I don't know what that's going to entail, but I'm sure it's going to be something negative. Those negative thoughts of, it's probably going to take another 2 months for them to pave the quarter-mile stretch out in front of our road right now. That's a personal negative thought that I've been contending with. For those of you who know, on North Sandusky Avenue in Bucyrus, it's been quite the project. And I've been struggling, and Sydney's been struggling with these thoughts of just negative thoughts of a road getting paved. Negativity can continue on throughout the day to where you end up finishing your day and you're thinking to yourself as you go to bed, well, I'm sure tomorrow is going to be just like today. Brothers and sisters, I want you to understand that, and maybe not all of us, but at least some of us struggle with negativity day after day after day. And all of us at least struggle from time to time with bouts of negativity. And there's reasons for that. We live in a very negative world. We're surrounded by negative news. You don't hear a lot of positive things when you turn on the television and you get your nightly news or your 24/7 news, whatever the case might be. There's once in a while there that encouraging story where you think, man, it is nice to know that there's still something good that takes place in this world. But for every encouraging story, you just hear these just nonstop negative things that are taking place all around us. And if you say, well, I'm not really much of a news person, you've probably got some negative people in your life. Maybe it could be a spouse, a coworker, some family member. And if you think to yourself, well, no, there's not any of that stuff, how many of you have Facebook here? Now, there's only like 4 hands that went up, so I know one of two things. Either we're filled with a room of liars, or you're not paying attention to the message already. You've checked yourself out. How many of you guys have Facebook here this morning? Now, all it takes is just scrolling through Facebook for about 5 minutes, and you start seeing negative stuff that's being shared. It seems like it's a whole lot easier to click share on the negative than it is the encouraging. Why? Because we can be negative people. That's what we're focused in on. We're accustomed to looking for it, and when we see it, we think, well, that's what I think the world needs to hear, is more negative news. We just struggle with negativity. For some of us, maybe we're struggling with the fact that the average person had, by the time they turned 18 years old, had already heard over 150,000 negative things spoken about them. You just hear negativity. Negativity. You take all of that in consideration, along with the fact that cognitive scientists and neuropsychologists who've long studied our thinking unanimously conclude that our thinking expands. Negativity creates more negativity, and negative thinking will eventually create negative habits, which leads to more negative thinking, to where we just, by our very makeup, are negative people. Positive thinking, though, can create more positive thinking, which creates more positive habits, which leads to more positive thinking. But when it's mostly negative out here, and it's been mostly negative that we've heard in here, we have a tendency of being negative. Now, this isn't a message this morning on the power of positive thinking, but this is a message that's built upon the premise that negativity will never produce positive results. And as believers, we should be the most positive people on this earth. We should be the type of individual that no matter what takes place outside these four walls, an individual who is lost in this world and they're just looking for something positive should be looking forward to that opportunity of, there is Matt Smith walking down the aisle in Walmart right now. And that's exactly somebody that I need to, because there's been a lot of negativity, man, and I don't want dragged down anymore. And I know that he is a positive person. That's what I need right now, that positivity. The type of individual who you could look at and say, oh, so your car's not starting again, and it's not. But you know what? Thank the Lord that I've got a car that won't start, because there's a lot of people that don't even have a car that might not even have the opportunity of not starting. Or it's one of those where you didn't get the job, and no, I didn't get the job promotion, or I didn't get the job, but thank God that I was at least given the interview. Because I tell you, man, a lot of people don't even have that opportunity. Your house is on fire. You know what? But thank God that I had a house that could go up in smoke, and I got insurance that it can get rebuilt. Those types of things where you're just looking and you're seeing that there's something positive, even when the world tells you everything that you're going through is negative. Now, how can we get to the point of being that type of a person? Well, it's not primarily by reading a bunch of self-help books, although that's what the world will tell us. But what it is, it's about looking to the good book, which is the Word of God, that gives us instructions. It's not about trying to give yourself that pep talk every single day of, I just got to be a more positive person. I just got to be a more positive person. Because let me tell you what, no matter how much you've got yourself pepped up, the first time you're struck with something negative, if you're still by nature that negative person, man, it's going to bring you right back down. But let me tell you something. Our theme this year is this: greater. God is greater. Remind your neighbor this morning that God is greater. He's even greater than any negative news, anything negative that has happened to you, or anything negative that is happening to you right now. The Apostle Paul had recently been arrested, beaten, imprisoned yet again. It seems like for him this is like a reoccurring theme in his life. We could look at that and say there is a lot of negative that's taking place in the Apostle Paul's life. Now, he could have done anything with this time in the prison cell. But wanting to make sure that he makes the most of every opportunity, wanting to make sure that he's constantly redeeming the time, he begins to write letters to loved ones. In this case, letters to the church, and we're going to look in his letter to the church at Philippi. So here he is. We can look at it as a negative situation if we're looking at it through the world's perspective, or if we're looking at it through the perspective of our own fallen nature. You're in a negative situation that's been brought about by a lot of negative things that have been happening in your life, and here you are beaten in a prison cell. What are you going to do? I'm going to write a letter. Now, for some of us, we could think, well, that's very therapeutic of you, because you can get out all of your frustrations and all of your anger and write all the people that have done you wrong and all that, and fill that entire thing, and kind of that self-help aspect, get it all out. But that's not what he does. He's not looking for an opportunity to vent. He's looking for that opportunity of sharing with others something that he has inside of him. He writes to encourage and edify other believers. And here in his letter to the church of Philippi, in the 4th chapter, he shares with them a challenge and a command. Notice with me Philippians chapter 4, verse number 4. Somebody tell me what that first word says. Always. Somebody define for me the word always. Always be full of joy in the Lord. So when you're physically out there enjoying freedom, and your health is good, and it seems like everybody around you just loves you, and man, they're encouraging you, and they're cheering you on, and everything's going good, and it's blessing after blessing after blessing, and those blessings aren't just internal, but you're seeing them externally. In those situations, always be joyful. And then when you're arrested, and you're beaten, and you're chained in the darkest of dungeons, what do? You be joyful. Now, is joy a positive thing or is joy a negative thing? Somebody help me out. So, you can say that. So, always be positive. Always be positive. I've just been arrested and beaten again. Good opportunity for you to be positive. Wow. And he's like, okay, so if you're struggling with that right now, which some of these readers probably are, wait, this letter came from Paul, who's in prison again, and he's telling us, and we're seeing persecution taking out here, and he's telling us, always be joyful. Man, are you serious? He's like, now I know that some of you are thinking that right now, so what does he follow it up with? He says, always be joyful. Lord, I say it again. Rejoice. Look at your neighbor and tell him to rejoice. Verse number 5, let everyone see that you are considerate in how much of what you do? In all you do. Remember, the Lord is coming soon. This week and next week, it's a brief two-part series titled Being Positive in a Negative World. We could also say being positive in a negative situation, in a negative circumstance. Something that seems to be kind of, it's kind of dragging me down a little bit. Man, I'm feeling the weight of this thing. Be positive even in something like that. This morning, I want us to understand that there are two different perceptions that we can have in life. And we have a choice in the matter. So the first thing you see in your outline here is the different perceptions. Okay, look with me again. Philippians chapter 4, verse 4. This is so big when we consider the positive perception we can have. Always be full of joy. Where? In the Lord. Paul doesn't say, always be full of joy in your good circumstances. Always be full of joy in your physical freedom. Always be full of joy in your physically good health. Always be full of joy in fill in the blank with whatever you might be thinking. But he says this, always be full of joy in the Lord. That's paramount. Number one in your outline is this. We got to understand that joy is a supernatural byproduct of a real relationship with the Lord. Real, lasting joy is not something we manufacture on our own, but it is something manufactured within us. And the ability to be full of joy occurs only when we can honestly say we are living our lives in the Lord. Meaning that He has first and final say in our day-to-day. That's a real relationship with the Lord. A real relationship in the Lord isn't saying that I one day said a prayer and now He should make sure that every day is good. And He should make sure that no matter what I do or what I don't do, no matter what decisions that I make today, He ought to hold up on His end of the bargain. He ought to do something supernatural in me and through me and to me. He ought to fix it all. That's not how it works. The way it works is this. We can always be full of joy as we live our lives in the Lord. So, when He tells us do this and don't do that, what do? We do this and don't do that. When He says stay away from that, what do? We stay away from that. And we get to that point where we realize that the holier we live, the more joyful we will be. There's something to that. The more sold out to the Lord that we are, the more joyful we will be. It's amazing. Now, I like to think that I'm still young. How many of you here this morning would agree that I'm still a little bit young? Encourage me this morning. Be positive. I've had 150 negative things spoken about me in my life before I was even 18. Now I'm like 30. Double that. Wow. Okay, I am old. Let's just skip. Yeah, I'm getting up there. Okay, let's just scrap that and get back to where we were on this thing, because that's a negative thought that just came into my mind, that I'm getting old. But it's amazing how even at my age and ministry, I've been in in ministry for some years now and stuff, but how there's times where you just can sit across from somebody, and sometimes I am the one who is in their seat dealing with the same things that they're dealing with. And you can look, and time again, you can see a person and how their demeanor has seemingly changed, and how they're no longer that person that they once were, and they're struggling with that. And how do I get this? Man, how do I turn this thing around? I used to have a better outlook on life, and now and you can look at their life, and you can say, well, it's as simple as this. You're heading in the wrong direction. Just look at your last 6 months of your life, or your last year of your life. Are you more sold out for the Lord today as you were 6 months ago? If the answer is no, there's a reason you're struggling with joy in your life. There's a reason for that. And it's because you're not as sold out as you once were. Be more sold out today than you were yesterday. Be more sold out tomorrow than you were today. And even with our holy living, when it comes to the way that we look at the things of this world and man, the things that our sinful nature desires and that temptation and stuff, live in such a way that tomorrow you are further away from that stuff. Man, I hate that stuff more and more. Live that way where tomorrow you hate the things of this world more than you did the day before. And you love the things of God more tomorrow than you have today. We have to understand that for us, it comes down to whether or not we are living our life in the Lord, in the ideal circumstances and even in the far from ideal circumstances. Just because Paul's in prison, he's like, man, that doesn't mean that I can't live in the Lord. I'm living in the Lord even in this prison cell. And it goes beyond just the opportunity and the benefit of joy. If we look at Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 10, the B portion of that, we see a reality that Nehemiah shared with the nation. When many of them were feeling dejected, many of them were feeling sad, and many of them were even feeling physically depleted, emotionally depleted, mentally depleted, spiritually depleted. What does he tell them? He says, don't be dejected and sad. For the joy of the Lord is your strength. It's that joy of the Lord that gives me the strength to be able to do what I never thought I'd have the strength to be able to do. I don't know, I need God's grace. If I were in Paul's shoes in that seat in that prison cell, to be able to say, man, I'll pick up a pen and I'll write. Or when somebody's coming to visit me, man, I'm going to tell them what to write. That takes some strength. And here Nehemiah is telling us the way that you can have that strength is by having the joy in the Lord. And the way that you can have that joy in the Lord is by living your life in the Lord, that real relationship with the Lord. So we can say this, the more joy we have in the Lord, the stronger we will be. Now we dig a little bit deeper. Look with me again, Philippians chapter 4, verse number 4. It says this, the Apostle Paul says, always be full of joy in the Lord. I say it again, rejoice. Let everyone see that you are considerate in all you do. Now, how is that not only a possible way to live, but how is that a probable way to live? That we're so filled with joy that we're able to look out for others as compared to always having to look for new sources of joy in our lives. Unfortunately, that's how a lot of professing believers live their lives. They're always looking for that joy. They're always me-centered. I need more joy in my life. Man, I need more joy in my life. I need more joy in my life. Every time we gather together, I need more joy in my life. And Paul is saying, no, what we do is we're so filled with joy that, man, we're just considerate of others. We're not thinking about how I'm so depleted. Instead, we're looking for people to pour into. Man, I got some joy to share. I'm overflowing with it. Well, the Holy Spirit is inspiring Paul to write this. He's inspiring him to command us and urge us on to do this now, because we need to keep in remembrance this reality. Remember, tell your neighbor there's something that they got to keep in mind. Tell them there's something you've got to keep in mind. Remember, the Lord is coming soon. So Paul's like amping this up a little bit here. He's saying, so I'm telling you how you can do this. Now I'm telling you why you need to do this. Because the Lord is coming soon. Brothers and sisters, there is a purpose. Number 2 in your outline would be this: a positive perception is built upon an eternal purpose. If one's purpose is confined and limited to the here and now, and the here and now seems to be kind of negative, their inner being and their outward demeanor will be negative, because everything's about the here and now. But if the purpose, I should say, for which we live our lives is eternal, it doesn't matter if the here and now is seemingly negative, because the eternal purpose is always positive. How many of you are believing that eternity is going to be downright awesome? That the next go around on this earth during the millennial reign of Jesus Christ is going to be awesome. The new heaven and the new earth, it's going to be awesome. Nothing but positive. So when we keep that into consideration, and that's our focus, even when the stuff around us seems to be a little negative, man, stuff's happening. There's wars and wars and more wars and rumors of wars, and man, stuff's going on, and people, man, they're just living out their sinful nature. Yeah, that's going to happen in the here and now. There's an adversary out there that, man, he's desiring to live out his being the prince and the powers of this air. But that's not our focus. Our focus is eternal. There is an eternal purpose. And when our focus is upon that eternal purpose, no matter if what we're going through in the here and now seems to be negative, our inner being and our outward demeanor is going to be positive. That's why, and I pray that God protects everybody's houses. But that's why if a house goes up in smoke, a believer can look at that and say, it's just a house. That's all it is. That's confined to this world. It was going to go up in smoke someday anyways. And the reality was, it was. But I've got something in here that lives eternally, and I'm okay. And God might even be working through this situation to bring about something that's eternal. I'm good with that. Brothers and sisters, this begs the question as to whether or not you have an eternal purpose. And I'll say you do have an eternal purpose, which now begs the next question of, do you understand that purpose, and are you living that purpose out? The Apostle Paul is saying, remember, the Lord is coming soon. We're not living for ourselves, we're living for others. For God's glory, for others' gain, and it is for our good, but live in such a way to where you can be considerate of others. And the only way that's going to happen is if we are so filled with joy that it's overflowing. Now, what's to potentially rob a person of that positive type of a perception? The Apostle Paul continues on in Philippians chapter 4 and verse number 6. He says this: don't worry about anything. The word translated worry here is a Greek word. The Greek word is merimneo, which means this. It means to worry or to be anxious, to be divided or distracted in your thoughts. That's the big meaning right there. To be divided in your thoughts. I'm living 25% for eternity, but 75% for the here and now. Don't do that. Don't do that, because if you do that, you're going to start becoming a worrisome person. You're going to start getting anxious. Don't do that. Don't be distracted. Don't be divided in your thoughts. Every way this verb in this particular passage could be defined is negative. So you could say this: don't be thinking negatively. Don't allow for your mind to go to that place where you might start being a negative person. We got the positive perception that we can have. We got here a negative perception that we can have. Now, before we define what negativity is, let me tell you what negativity is not. Negativity is not being open and real and addressing a real, legitimate problem. Sometimes that's what we're told is man, you just live like that problem's not there. You just keep speaking that it's not there. You just keep saying, man, it's not. No, that's not. That's not how it is. It's being real. And but James talks about that. Man, you got to struggle, talk about it. Don't keep that in, because the inner you knows it's there. No matter what you try telling your mind, man, you're not God. You don't speak things into existence. God does. But here's what you can do. You can be open about things. You can be real about problems. Negativity is not being real and open about a real, legitimate problem. Negativity is not being unhappy about your current happenings. There can be times where we can be, where the Apostle Paul, he makes this clear throughout his writings, where he talks about current situations and expresses inner feelings, where he's like, man, I'm perplexed, but I'm not driven to despair. Man, I'm not going to allow this to make me into a negative person, but yet at the same time, what I can say is, I don't quite get it, and I don't have to get it. I don't have to understand everything. I'm not going to be desperate about this. I'm pressed about on every side, but I'm not crushed. There's a reason he wasn't crushed, and there's a reason why so many times we are crushed. Because Paul understood something that sometimes we just don't get. Now, so those things aren't negativity, but this is what negativity is. Number one in your outline is it's the continual denial, absence, refusal, or removal of something positive. Where something positive can be shared with you, and you instantly dismiss that, and you start thinking about the negative. It's like one of those where a person can come up to you and say, you look great today, and you look and say, you're just saying that because I know I don't. There was just something positive that was spoken, and negativity is where you take that positive, you throw it out, and you tell yourself something that maybe was told to you many, many years ago, or maybe it's something that you legitimately are struggling with feeling, and you're so focused in on that. I like to, with Sydney, we'd joke around, different times where she'll say something positive because she's a positive, upbeat, encouraging type person, and she could say something positive. And my go-to line is always one of this: no, I'm not. I'm just a cotton-headed ninny muggins. You guys know what movie that's off of? Elf? Yeah. Where that's like my favorite line in the movie, and that was my thing that I would always go to, where it just, that's kind of a joking sort of a thing. But there are times where legitimately I feel like, man, I'm just a cotton-headed ninny muggins. That's all that I am. And we spew out these negativities, and we think about these negativities compared to allowing somebody to speak something positive in our life instead of allowing the Word of God to speak something positive into our lives. The type of individual who, if the sun, is the sun still shining out there today? The type of individual who you could look at and say, man, the sun sure is beautiful today. It's a bright, shining day. And you think, yeah, but it's too cold to really be able to do anything outside today. There was that positive. And right away, you go to a negative place. And you dismiss everything positive, but you magnify the negative. Negativity is this. It's features of hostility, withdrawal, or pessimism that hinder or oppose constructive treatment or development. This last definition is big, especially considering its spiritual ramifications. Because let me tell you what, brothers and sisters, we are spiritual beings. And for us, we need a spiritual remedy. It would be this. It's an attitude. Negativity is an attitude of dissatisfaction, defeatism, and fear. Think about this when it's dissatisfaction. There was this optimist who was best friends with a pessimist. And he was always trying to find things that could make his pessimist friend say something positive, but he seemingly never could. One day the optimist decided that he would buy a fabulous pet for his friend. This pet that would be nothing short of amazing, nothing wrong with it at all. So he went to this specialty pet store that sold only these perfect pets. And he explained his mission to the owner. And the owner said, you know what? I have got this fabulous parrot that can say so many things, so many beautiful things. He can articulate things in a beautiful fashion. And he has the most beautiful of colorings. The optimist said, no, my friend will just make fun of the bird's any mispronunciation. The moment that he mispronounces something, he's going to make fun of it. And he's going to point out the colors that this parrot does not have. The owner of the store said, well, I'll think of something different. So he thought about this next, this perfect pet. And he said, you know what? I've got the perfect pet for you now. And it is this dog that has the ability to walk on water. Seriously, said the optimist. A dog that can walk on water, I will take him and I will buy him for my pessimist friend. He won't be able to say anything negative about that dog. So the optimist took this new dog out on a walk by the lake and told his pessimist friend, I've given you this dog. And this dog can do some amazing things. He said, why don't you start playing fetch with him? So he started playing fetch with him. The optimist said, why don't you throw that ball out on the water and see if he'll go out in the water and get it? So he did. So he threw it out on the water, and this dog runs across the water, grabs the ball, and brings it back. The optimist thinking, this is the very thing that he's not going to be able to find anything negative to say about. He said, so did you notice anything about your dog? And he said, yeah, he can't swim. That's the type of negative person where even when we look around and we see this, we see the beauty that God has allowed us to take part in on this life's journey. And we think about the wonders and the glories of being able to have an eternal life with Him. And there's all of those great things, but yet our minds go back to looking for the negative. The children of Israel, for the most part, were negative people. God, he had granted them freedom that they longed for from the Egyptian slavery. He gives them that freedom. They're delivered from Egypt only to eventually have this outlook in life. Look at this, Numbers chapter 14, verse number 1. It says this, then the whole community began weeping aloud, and they cried all night. Their voices rose in a great chorus of protest against Moses and Aaron. If we only had died in Egypt, or even here in the wilderness, they complained. Why is the Lord taking us to this country only to have us die in battle? Our wives and little ones will be carried off as plunder. Wouldn't it have been better for us to return to Egypt? Then they plotted among themselves, let's choose a new leader and go back to Egypt. These are people who are dissatisfied, and they express that in their constant negativity. Let me tell you, brothers and sisters, there's a lot of times the children of Israel aren't far different from the church of Jesus Christ. Where, man, God's done some amazing things in us. He's doing some amazing things for us. And our minds take us back to, man, it'd been a whole lot better if I just went back. At the entrance of the promised land, there were two optimists who said this, let's go and take the land. Man, we can go in there and we can do that. But then the pessimists showed up and they said this in Numbers chapter 13, verse 31, the B portion says this, we can't go up against them. They are stronger than we are. So they began to spread this bad report about the land among the Israelites. Let me tell you, negativity spreads. And they said this, the land that we traveled through, these were the spies, the land that we traveled through and explored will devour anyone who goes to live there. All the people we saw were huge. We even saw giants there, the descendants of Anak. Next to them, we felt like grasshoppers. And that's what they thought too. I've always wondered this, how in the world did they know what they thought? Their mind was playing tricks on them and speaking to them things that weren't real. These people believed they were no match for the inhabitants of this land. They were defeated before a battle had ever begun, and they expressed it with their negativity. This defeatist attitude in the face of Goliath. All of the most trained and skilled Israelites responded in this way. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse number 24. As soon as the Israelite army saw him, as soon as they saw him, their negativity began to rear its ugly head. They began to run away in fright. Have you seen the giant? The men asked. He comes out each day to defy Israel. The king has offered a huge reward to anyone who kills him. He will give that man one of his daughters for a wife, and the man's entire family will be exempted from paying taxes. Now, you would think that there'd be some single men who'd be jumping at that opportunity. But I mean, I will try. And if I go down, I will go down swinging, because now I can have like the one of the king's daughter. I can be in the royal family, and I don't have to pay taxes the rest of my life. Wow, this is great. But instead, they were all frozen in fear, unwilling to fight, and they expressed that by way of their negativity. Have you seen that giant? In all of these accounts, these were people who claimed relationship with the one who, no matter the opposition, no matter the obstacle, is always greater. These were people who claimed a relationship with him, but yet they looked at their current circumstances and they said, no, they are far too great for me to ever be able to make my way through. You fast forward to 2019, and there are times that we as people who claim relationships with the one who, no matter the opposition, no matter the obstacle, is always greater, we can be those constant negative Neds and negative Nancys. Man, God is good. Not very good to me. Just see my life. Easy for you to say. You live on Easy Street, and I live on Trouble Avenue. God's not. No, man, I tell you, he's keeping it away from me for some reason. But even those of us who are generally positive can still at times, through a wilderness, through a valley, struggle with negative thoughts. It's understandable as long as we don't allow for those negative thoughts to consume us. Because brothers and sisters, number 4 in your outline, once anyone is consumed with negative thoughts, they will be controlled by those negative thoughts. There's a reason why those children of Israel were like, man, I'm going back. Makes no sense. No right-thinking person can read through Numbers and say, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. That's what you should do. But yet, in that instance, that's what they wanted to do. No right-thinking individual could look at the story, and especially how we see it play out with Goliath, say, why were you guys so scared? Did you forget about what God has done for you all those times? And you think he's going to make you your first disappointment, or his first disappointment? What are you thinking? But they became consumed with these negative thoughts, and now they're controlled by those negative thoughts. Those negative thoughts that rob a person of their present life. And regardless of their present state, a negative person will only be focusing on and expecting the negative in the future. That's what they're going to be focused on. It's going to be disappointment. My life's been disappointment up until now. Or maybe it was good for a period of time, but now it's nothing but disappointments, and I know what my future's going to hold. There's a sign that you'll sometimes see that describes this way of thinking, this negative way of thinking. This sign legitimately says this. It says, don't look, you will see. Don't listen, you will hear. Don't think, you will learn. Don't make a decision, you will be wrong. Don't walk, you will stumble. Don't run, you will fall. Don't live, you will die. And there are people who live their lives with that sort of a mindset. I'm not going to look because I know I'll see something I don't want to see. I don't want to listen because I know I'm going to hear something that I don't want to hear. I don't want to think because, man, I will learn something about me or something about them or something about a situation. I don't want to make a decision because I know I am going to be wrong. I don't want to walk this spiritual life because I know I'm going to stumble. I don't want to run in the spiritual life because I will fall. I don't want to even try living it. I know I'll die. It's this type of person who would have the epitaph that would read this on their gravestone. I expected this. Think about that, brothers and sisters. Here I am. I expected this. Lived my entire life expecting this. Matt Smith, it's May 24th, 1982. For those of you who are trying to guess my age, right there gives you that opportunity. Do the math for me. 37, right? Yeah, right? 36, 37. Yeah, wow, 37 years old. But it'd be one of those where Matt Smith, May 24th, 1982 to only God knows, but it might happen sometime in 2095 or something like that. Because I would not want to, go before my wife, and she is a little bit younger than me, so yeah, I'm going to live to be 100 and whatever that is. But yet, living the entire life and then being able to say, man, I expected this. I expected this. My entire life, I've been focused on negative, 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 and here I lie. Brothers and sisters, as a believer, that should not be our mindset because we are not living for this life anyways. What we should be expecting, that amazing marriage feast with Jesus Christ, we should say, that's what awaits me. And since that is what awaits me, I have no choice but just to be overjoyed. It's good, but your life is bad. No, it's not. Do you not see what I see? Do you not see what the future holds for me? And you think I'm going to be negative about the here and now? There is no way. Brothers and sisters, life is way too brief to be a negative person. We pass through this life but once. Live in such a way where you can contribute to those around you. So what's the remedy here? Paul goes on to say in Philippians chapter 4, verse number 6, he goes on to say what a positive person, someone filled with joy, that's able to always rejoice what they do. Philippians chapter 4, again, verse 6, don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need, and notice this, thank Him for all He has done. Paul, you are in prison. Do you not see that? And you're thanking the Lord for all that He has done? Fast forward to 2019, I have some emotional and spiritual and physical needs right now. And I'm to thank God for what He's done? Yes, you are to thank God that He's been so good to you. Tell your neighbor this morning, say, God's been good to me. God has been good to me. Now, this is important because verse number 7, you're following along with me this morning. What's the first word in verse number 7? Then and only then, you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. His peace that passes all understanding. And that also will do this, will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus. This time, Paul doesn't mention the title of Lord, but he mentions Christ, the anointed one, the one who will straight up do supernatural things in you and through you, the one who will be peace for you when everything around you seems chaotic, the one who is able to do for you what you could have never done on your own, the one who is able to do something for you while you're in a wait-and-see mode. I'm in an emotional prison. Man, I'm going to surrender to the Lord. I'm going to thank Him for everything He's done, and then I'm just going to wait and see what He does. Wait is a willingness to serve even as you wait. See, this confident assurance that God is working something out. There's a reason for this. There's a reason my car won't start. There's a reason that my house went up in smoke. There's a reason for what's been taking place in my life. God is sovereign. God is providential. He's working something out for His glory, for others' gain, for my good. Which brings us to this. We have a choice, to be or not to be that negative Ned or that negative Nancy, or to be that positive, use the word Pat, because Pat can be a guy's name or a girl's name, okay? So that way I've only got to use one name there. So tell your neighbor, say, be a Pat. Be a Pat. So Philippians chapter 4, verse number 8, Paul continues on. That would have made a whole lot better if I would have said positive Paul. Okay, because Paul is the one that's doing the writing, and P positive Paul. Tell your neighbor, say, I take that back, be a positive Paul. All right, so now your neighbor's confused. Do I be a Pat or do I be a positive Paul? Doesn't matter. Philippians chapter 4, verse number 8. And now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing. Fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Do those sound like positive things, yes or no? Fix your thoughts on the positive things of God. Keep putting into practice all you learned and received from me, everything you heard from me and saw me doing. So understand this. Paul was living a life surrendered to the Lord, allowing God to work in him and through him, allowing God to speak through him in his teachings and in his letters, in his writing. So he's saying, put all of that stuff into practice, live it out, then the God of peace will be with you. Number one on the choice, we have to understand that what you think matters, and it matters more than you think. Think back upon the instances of negativity that we touched on with the children of Israel. In each instance, they forgot what they should have remembered, which only left mind space and soul space to think about the things that'd be better served to forget. And that's what we oftentimes do. We forget the things that we should remember, only to leave space in our minds for the things that we should quickly forget. Listen to me. Never let the negative events of yesterday or even the negative events of today rob you of the potential positive events that can take place in your life tomorrow, and blind you to the positive things that are taking place in your life right now. Now, all of that easier said than done, but if it's in God's Word, it's doable. And Paul shares with us how. 4 things. You pray daily. I have to pray my way through life's circumstances instead of trying to worry them away. You will never be able to worry them away, but you can pray through life circumstances. The second one is focus daily. I have to focus my thoughts on the good and eternal things of God instead of the negative and temporal things of this world. I have to focus daily. I have to learn daily. I have to learn from the Lord. I have to learn from the Word. And I have to live daily. I have to live out what I've prayed about. I have to live out what I've focused on. I have to live out what I've learned. The final point that I really want us to take to heart this morning is this. If allowed, worry and negativity persists. It will not go away on its own. Instead, it will only spread. But if surrendered, that's meaning you're surrendering to the Lord, your entire being. But if surrendered, joy and positivity is produced. For our closing comfort and challenge, I want us to revisit the scene of Goliath and the Israelites on the battlefield. The nation and the army, they're fearing for the worst. They're focused on the negative, and then here comes David. 1 Samuel 17, verse number 32. David's telling Saul this. He says, don't worry. Sound familiar? He's like, don't worry about this Philistine. He's like, why are you being so negative about this 9-foot giant in your life? I mean, seriously, that dude is so small and he's so insignificant. I'll go fight him. Man, that's the difference. But think about it that in your own life. And what you see as that obstacle. Man, he was a 9-foot giant. And he said, don't worry about him. He's small and insignificant. I'll go fight him. Don't be ridiculous, the negative King Saul replied. There's no way you can fight this Philistine and possibly win. There's this defeatist attitude. You're only a boy, and he's been a man of war since his youth. But David persisted in a good way here. I have been taking care of my father's sheep and goats, he said. When a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and I rescue the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and club it to death. Wow, that's crazy. Verse 30, it's real though. Verse 36, I have done this both to lions and to bears, and I will do this to the pagan Philistine too, for he has defied the armies of the living God. Verse 37, the Lord, the one who speaks and I listen, the one who has been prepping me for such a time as this. The Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear, will rescue me from this Philistine. So Saul's convinced. He tries to get his armor onto David. It doesn't fit. David goes out into the battlefield without any physical armor that a soldier would have, but he has spiritual armor all over him. Look at verse number 41. Goliath walked out toward David with his shield bearer ahead of him, sneering in contempt at this ruddy-faced boy. Am I a dog, he roared at David, that you come at me with a stick? And he cursed David by the names of his gods. Come over here, and I will give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals, Goliath yelled. David replied to the Philistine, you come to me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Verse 46, today the Lord, everyone say the Lord. Today the Lord will conquer you. You look down at verse number 48. As Goliath moved closer to attack, David quickly ran out to meet him, reaching into a shepherd's bag and taking out a stone. He hurled it with his sling and hit the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank in, and Goliath stumbled and fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with only a sling and a stone, for he had no sword. But what he did have was far greater than any sword. What he had was the Lord God, who is always greater. So David was able to experience something positive, that positive outcome. And all the while on that journey up to this point, what he was experiencing was the positive, that the Lord is so good. Brothers and sisters, take comfort in knowing that the Lord God will only lead you to greater and greater things. A temporal mindset may try convincing you that what you're experiencing today as you're following the Lord, it's not greater. Temporal mindset may try convincing you to be negative about your day-to-day, but the eternal mindset reminds you that God is always victorious, and He is always working something out. He sees the big picture that you do not see. But accept this challenge. We have the choice. We can be like that powerless, fearful army of Israel and be remembered as that negative person who was never satisfied in this life. They were always defeated in this life. They were a person who was full of fear in this life. Or you can be remembered as that mighty warrior like David, a person who lived their life for the Lord, relying upon His supernatural working within you to produce joy that overflows, to give you strength that you need to be able to fulfill your God-given purpose. Brothers and sisters, that is something to be positive about.